Hey, it's Mark Lanier with your video thought for the day. This week and probably next week, I'm looking at the 10 Commandments. And yesterday I started this talking about the context of how Israel has been called out by God from Egypt. Now, they lived in Egypt for like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. I think like 400 years. And in Egypt, they were subjected to a theology that was not very accurate if we think of theology as talking about God. The theology in Egypt had missed the mark of who God is in a lot of ways. It's one of the core things that God's got to do as he's calling his people out is reform or reshape or give them a better understanding of the reality of who God is. And we see that in the way that God lays out these 10 commandments on Sinai. The first commandment. This was the commandment I looked at yesterday that says you're not supposed to have any gods before God, the true God. And that's a marvelous commandment that the Israelites needed to hear, but we need to hear it today as well, though maybe in a different context. Today, I want to look at the second commandment. In the second commandment, God says not to have any graven image of him or any shape or form of him that's been made by humanity. Here's the problem we've got. There is a tendency among all of us people to try to define and understand things by our own thoughts and our own imaginations and our own experiences. And so typically when we come across something, we relate it in our brain to something we already know. Now, Israel would have that same temptation with God. Heavens, the Egyptians had that with gods. The Egyptians would associate gods with various things that the God covered. And so you might have a god who's the god of represented by frogs, or we talked about Osiris as the god of the underworld and the flooding of the Nile, or you can look at gods who were jackals or dogs or all of this type of stuff. And there were representations of them that would then be worshipped by the Egyptians as if those were God. And God says, you're not supposed to have any image or any form of me. Why? Because God's not a product of human imagination. God's not a product of what we can find on this earth. There's a Latin preposition. It's just the letter a, if you will. And that can mean something like from. You know, if you're absent, if you're away from school, you're from school. You take another Latin word, se, and it's say, and it just means himself, all right? You put those two together, and you have this idea of aseity, the aseity of God. The idea that God is entirely of himself. He's not part of creation. He's not the frogs that are hopping out of the Nile or into the Nile. He's not the Nile. He's not the sun going across the sky. He's not the sky itself. God is of himself. In a very real sense, God exists outside of nature. Nature and creation are something that God made, but God on his own exists totally independent of the things we know and experience. Now, that's all great theology, but what does that mean for you and me today in this thought for the day? Well, it means that the call not to have a graven image is a call for us not to reduce God down to what we envision him to be. My goal in this life is never to find a God that's who I want him to be. My goal in this life is to find God for who he is. And that means I've got to look and find that. And that is your video thought for the day.